Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mellow Murmurs ASMR. I know it's been a while, a long while, but I'm back and I'm hoping to create a video schedule soon. For today's video, I thought it'd be nice if I could read you a book. Well, not a whole book, a section of a book. So, why don't we pick one together? I have 5 books in front of me, and I figured you could tell me which one you would like me to read. So the first one is by Henry James. It's The Turn of the Screw and Other Short Fiction. The next one is by Jonathan Swift, Gulliver's Travels. I love the smell of old books. Third option is by Mary Shelley, Frankenstein. The fourth option is by Herman Melville, Billy Budd, Bartleby, and Other Stories. You may also notice that my background is different. I'm in the process of figuring out what my permanent background may be. My hand also itches. And I'm saving the best book for last. It's by Ray Bradbury. Fahrenheit 451. This is the 50th anniversary edition. 50th anniversary edition. You want this one? Okay, you may choose that. So, shall we begin? Okay, I've adjusted the microphone and the camera. If they give you ruled paper, write the other way. Juan Ramon Jimenez. Part 1, The Hearth and the Salamander. It was a pleasure to burn. It was a special pleasure to see things eaten, to see things blackened and changed, with the brass nozzle in his fists, with this great python spitting its venomous kerosene upon the world, the blood pounding in his head, and his hands were the hands of some amazing conductor playing all the symphonies of blazing and burning to bring down the tatters and charcoal ruins of history. with his symbolic helmet numbered 451 on his stolid head, and his eyes all orange flame with the thought of what came next. He flicked the igniter, and the house jumped up in a gorging fire that burned the evening sky red and yellow and black. He strode in a swarm of fireflies. He wanted above all, like the old joke, to shove a marshmallow and a stick in the furnace, while the flapping pigeon-winged books died on the porch and lawn of the house, while the books went up in sparkling whirls and blew away on a wind turned dark with burning. Montag grinned the fierce grin of all men singed and driven back by flame. He knew that when he returned to the firehouse he might not wink at himself, a minstrel man, burnt, corked in the mirror. Later, going to sleep, he would feel the fiery smile still gripped by his face muscles in the dark. It never went away, that smile. It never ever went away, as long as he remembered. He hung up his black beetle-collared helmet and shined it. He hung his flame-proof jacket neatly. He showered luxuriously, and then, whistling, hands in pockets, walked across the upper floor of the fire station and fell down the hole. At the last moment, when disaster seemed positive, he pulled his hands from his pockets and broke his fall by grasping the golden pole. He slid to a squeaking halt, the heels 1 inch from the concrete floor downstairs. He walked out of the fire station and along the midnight street towards the subway where the silent air-propelled train slid soundlessly down its lubricated flue in the earth and let him out with a great puff of warm air onto the cream-tiled escalator rising to the suburb. Whistling, he let the escalator waft him into the still night air. He walked toward the corner, thinking little at all about nothing in particular. Before he reached the corner, however, he slowed as if a wind had sprung up from somewhere, as if someone had called his name. The last few nights he had had the most uncertain feelings about the sidewalk just around the corner here, moving in the starlight toward his house. He had felt that a moment prior to his making the turn, someone had been there. The air seemed charged with a special calm, as if someone had waited there, quietly, and only a moment before he came, simply turned to a shadow and let him through. Perhaps his nose detected a faint perfume. Perhaps the skin on the backs of his hands, on his face, felt the temperature rise at this one spot where a person standing might raise the immediate atmosphere 10 degrees for an instant. There was no understanding it. Each time he made the turn, he saw only the white, unused, buckling sidewalk with perhaps, on one night, something vanishing swiftly across the lawn before he could focus his eyes or speak. But now tonight, he slowed almost to a stop. His inner mind, reaching out to turn the corner for him, had heard the faintest whisper. Breathing? Or was the atmosphere compressed merely by someone standing very quietly there, waiting? He turned the corner. The autumn leaves blew over the moonlit pavement in such a way as to make a girl who was moving there seem fixed to a sliding walk, letting the motion of the wind and the leaves carry her forward. Her head was half bent to watch her shoes stir the circling leaves. Her face was slender and milk-white, and in it was a kind of gentle hunger that touched over everything with tireless curiosity. It was a look, almost, of pale surprise. The dark eyes were so fixed to the world that no move escaped them. Her dress was white and it whispered. He almost thought he heard the motion of her hands as she walked, and the infinitely small sound now, the white stir of her face turning when she discovered she was a moment away from a man who stood in the middle of the pavement waiting. The trees overhead made a great sound of letting down their dry rain. The girl stopped and looked as if she might pull back in surprise, but instead stood regarding Montag with eyes so dark and shining and alive that he felt he had said something quite wonderful, but he knew his mouth had only moved to say hello, and then when she seemed hypnotized by the salamander on his arm and the phoenix disc on his chest, he spoke again. "Of course," he said. "You're our new neighbor, aren't you? And you must be—" She raised her eyes from his professional symbols. "The fireman." Her voice was trailed off. "How oddly you say that. I'd have known it with my eyes shut," she said slowly. "What, the smell of kerosene? My wife always complains," he laughed. "You never wash it off completely." "No, you don't," she said in awe. He felt she was walking in a circle around him, turning him end for end, shaking him quietly and emptying his pockets without once moving herself. "Kerosene," he said, because the silence had lengthened, "is nothing but perfume to me." Does it seem like that? Really? Of course, why not? She gave herself time to think of it. I don't know. She turned to face the sidewalk going toward their homes. Do you mind if I walk back with you? I'm Clarice McClannon. Clarice. Guy Montag. Come along. What are you doing out so late wandering around? How old are you? They walked in the warm, cool, blowing night on the silvered pavement, and there was the faintest breath of fresh apricots and strawberries in the air, and he looked around and realized this was quite impossible, so late in the year. There was only the girl walking with him now, her face bright as snow in the moonlight, and he knew she was working his questions around, seeking the best answers she could possibly give. Well, she said, I'm 17, and I'm crazy. My uncle says the two always go together. When people ask your age, he said, always say 17 and insane. Isn't this a nice time of night to walk? I like to smell things and look at things and sometimes stay up all night walking and watch the sunrise. They walked on again in silence, and finally she said, thoughtfully, You know, I'm not afraid of you at all. He was surprised. Why should you be? So many people are. Afraid of firemen, I mean. But you're just a man, after all. He saw himself in her eyes, suspended in two shining drops of bright water. Himself dark and tiny in fine detail. The lines above his mouth, everything there, as if her eyes were two miraculous bits of violet amber that might capture and hold him intact. Her face, turned to him now, was fragile milk crystal with a soft and constant light in it. It was not the hysterical light of electricity, but what? But the strangely comfortable and rare and gently flattering light of the candle. One time, as a child, in a power failure, his mother had found and lit the last candle, and there had been a brief hour of rediscovery, of such illumination that space lost its vast dimensions and drew comfortably around them, and they, mother and son, alone, transformed, hoping that the power might not come on again too soon. And then Clarice McClannon said, Do you mind if I ask how long you've worked at being a fireman? Since I was 20, 10 years ago. Do you ever read any of the books you burn? He laughed. That's against the law. Oh, of course. It's fine work. Monday burn Millet, Wednesday Whitman, Friday Faulkner. Burn 'em to ashes, then burn the ashes. That's our official slogan. They walked still farther, and the girl said, Is it true that long ago firemen put fires out instead of going to start them? No, houses have always been fireproof. Take my word for it. Strange. I once heard that a long time ago houses used to burn by accident and they needed firemen to stop the flames. He laughed. She glanced quickly over. Why are you laughing? I don't know. He started to laugh again and stopped. Why? You laugh when I haven't been funny, and you answer right off. You never stop to think what I've asked you. He stopped walking. You are an odd one, he said, looking at her. Haven't you any respect? I don't mean to be insulting. It's just I love to watch people too much, I guess. Well, doesn't this mean anything to you? He tapped the numerals 451 stitched on his char-collared sleeve. Yes, she whispered. She increased her pace. Have you ever watched the jet cars racing on the boulevards down the way? You're changing the subject. I sometimes think drivers don't know what grass is, or flowers, because they never see them slowly, she said. If you showed a driver a green blur, oh yes, he'd say, that's grass. A pink blur? That's a rose garden. White blurs are houses. Brown blurs are cows. My uncle drove slowly on a highway once. He drove 40 miles an hour and they jailed him for 2 days. Isn't that funny? And sad, too. You think too many things, said Montag uneasily. I rarely watch the parlor walls or go to races or fun parks, so I have lots of times for crazy thoughts, I guess. Have you seen the 200-foot-long billboards in the country beyond town? Did you know that once billboards were only 20 feet long? But cars started rushing by so quickly they had to stretch the advertising out so it would last. I didn't know that, Montag laughed abruptly. But I didn't... Bet I know something else you don't. There's dew on the grass in the morning. He suddenly couldn't remember if he had known this or not, and it made him quite irritable. And if you look, she nodded at the sky, there's a man in the moon. He hadn't looked for a long time. They walked the rest of the way in silence, hers thoughtful, his a kind of clenching and uncomfortable silence in which he shot her accusing glances. When they reached her house, all its lights were blazing. What's going on? Montag had rarely seen that many house lights. Oh, just my mother and father and uncle sitting around talking. It's like being a pedestrian, only rarer. My uncle was arrested another time. Did I tell you? For being a pedestrian? Oh, we're most peculiar. But what do you talk about? She laughed at this. Good night. She started up her walk. Then she seemed to remember something and came back to look at him with wonder and curiosity. "Are you happy?" she said. "Am I what?" he cried. But she was gone, running in the moonlight, her front door shut gently. Happy, of all the nonsense! He stopped laughing. He put his hand into the glove hole of his front door and let it know his touch. The front door slid open. "Of course I'm happy. What does she think? I'm not?" he asked the quiet rooms. He stood looking up at the ventilator grill in the hall, and suddenly remembered that something lay hidden behind the grill, something that seemed to peer down at him now. He moved his eyes quickly away. What a strange meeting on a strange night. He remembered nothing like it save one afternoon a year ago, when he met an old man in the park, and they had talked. Montag shook his head. He looked at a blank wall. His girl's face was there, really quite beautiful in memory, astonishing in fact. She had a very thin face, like the dial of a small clock seen faintly in a dark room in the middle of the night, when you waken to see the time and see the clock telling you the hour and the minute and the second, with white silence and a glowing all certainty, and knowing what it had to tell of the night passing swiftly on toward further darkness, but moving also toward a new sun. "What?" asked Montag of that other self, the subconscious idiot that ran babbling at times, quite independent of will, habit, and conscience. He glanced back at the wall. How like a mirror, too, her face. Impossible, for how many people did you know who refracted your own lights to you? People were more often, he researched for a simile, found one in his work, torches, blazing away until they whiffed out. How rarely did other people's faces take of you and throw back to you your own expression, your own innermost trembling thought. What incredible power of identification the girl had. She was like the eager watcher of a marionette show, anticipating each flicker of an eyelid, each gesture of his hand, each flick of a finger, the moment before it began. How long had they walked together? 3 minutes? 5? Yet how large that time seemed now. How immense a figure she was on the stage before him. What a shadow she threw on his wall with her slender body. He felt that if his eye itched, she might blink, and if the muscles of his jaw stretched imperceptibly, she would yawn long before he would. Why, he thought, now that I think of it, she almost seemed to be waiting for me there, in the street, so damned late at night. He opened the bedroom door. It was like coming on into the cold marbled room of a mausoleum after the moon has set. Complete darkness, not a hint of silver. World outside, the windows tightly shut, the chamber a tomb, world where no sound from the great city could penetrate. The room was not empty. He listened. The little mosquito delicate dancing hum in the air, the electrical murmur of a hidden wasp snug in its special pink warm nest. The music was almost loud enough so he could follow the tune. He felt his smile slide away, melt, fold over and down on itself like a tallow skin, like the stuff of a fantastic candle burning too long, and now collapsing and now blown out. Darkness. He was not happy. He was not happy. He said the words to himself. He recognized this as the true state of affairs. He wore his happiness like a mask, and the girl had run off across the lawn with the mask, and there was no way of going to knock on her door and ask for it back. Without turning on the light, he imagined how this room would look. His wife, stretched on the bed, uncovered and cold, like a body displayed on the lid of a tomb, her eyes fixed to the ceiling by invisible threads of steel, immovable. In her ears, the little seashells, the thimble radios tamped tight, an electronic ocean of sound, of music and talk coming in on the shore of her unsleeping mind. The room was indeed empty. Every night the waves came in and bore her off on their great tides of sound, floating her, wide-eyed, toward morning. There had been no night in the last 2 years that Mildred had not swum in that sea, had not gladly gone down in it for the 3rd time. The room was cold, but nonetheless he felt he could not breathe. He did not wish to open the drapes and open the French windows, for he did not want the moon to come into the room. So with the feeling of a man who will die in the next hour for lack of air, he felt his way toward his open, separate, and therefore cold bed. An instant before his foot hit the object on the floor, he knew it would hit such an object. It was not unlike the feeling he had experienced before turning the corner and almost knocking the girl down. His foot, sending vibrations ahead, received back echoes of the small barrier across its path, even as the foot swung. His foot kicked. The object gave a dull clink and slid off in the darkness. He stood very straight and listened to the person on the dark bed in the completely featureless night. The breath coming out of the nostrils was so faint it stirred only the farthest fringes of life, a small leaf, a black feather, a single fiber of air. He still did not want outside light. He pulled out his igniter, felt the salamander etched on its silver disc, gave it a flick. 2 moonstones looked up at him in the light of his small handheld fire, 2 pale moonstones buried into a creek of clear water over which the life of the world ran, not touching them. Mildred! Her face was like a snow-covered island upon which rain might fall, but it felt no rain, over which clouds might pass their moving shadows, but she felt no shadow. There was only the singing of the thimble wasps in her tamped-shut ears, and her eyes all glass, and breath going in and out, softly, faintly, in and out of her nostrils, and her not caring whether it came or went or came. The object he had sent tumbling with his foot now glinted under the edge of his own bed. The small crystal bottle of sleeping tablets, which earlier today had been filled with 30 capsules, and which now lay uncapped and emptied in the light of the tiny flare. As he stood there, with the sky over the house screamed, there was a tremendous ripping sound, as if 2 giant hands had torn 10,000 miles of black lines down the seam. Montag was cut in half. He felt his chest chopped down and split apart. The jet bombers going over, going over, going over. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 6 of them, 9 of them, 12 of them. One and one and one, and another and another and another, did all the screaming for him. He opened his own mouth and let their shriek come down and out between his bared teeth. The house shook. The flare went out in his hand. The moonstones vanished. He felt his hand plunge toward the telephone. The jets were gone. He felt his lips move, brushing the mouthpiece of the phone. Emergency hospital. A terrible whisper. He felt that the stars had been pulverized by the sound of the black jets, and that in the morning the earth would be covered with their dust like a strange snow. That this was the idiot thought. He stood shivering in the dark, and let his lips go on moving and moving. They had this machine. They had 2 machines, really. One of them slid down into your stomach like a black cobra down an echoing well, looking for all the old water and the old time gathered there. It drank up the green matter that flowed to the top in a slow boil. Did it drink of the darkness? Did it suck out all the poisons accumulated over the years? It fed in silence with an occasional sound of inner suffocation and blind searching. It had an eye. The impersonal operator of the machine could, by wearing a special optical helmet, gaze into the soul of the person whom he was pumping out. What did the eye see? He did not say. He saw but did not see what the eye saw. The entire operation was not unlike the digging of a trench in one yard. The woman on the bed was no more than a hard stratum of marble that they had reached. Go on anyway, shove the bore down, slush up the emptiness, if such a thing can be brought out in the throne of the suction snake. The operator stood smoking a cigarette. The other machine was working too. The other machine, operated by an equally impersonal fellow in non-sustainable reddish-brown coveralls. This machine pumped all the blood from her body and replaced it with fresh blood and serum. Got to clean 'em out both ways, said the operator, standing over the silent woman. No use getting the stomach if you don't clean the blood. Leave that stuff in the blood, and the blood hits the brain like a mallet. Bang, a couple thousand times, and the brain just gives up, just quits. Stop it, said Montag. I was just saying, said the operator. Are you done? Said Montag. They shut the machines up tight. We're done. His anger did not even touch them. They stood with the cigarette smoke curling around their noses and into their eyes without making them blink or squint. That's $50. First, why don't you tell me if she's going to be all right? Sure, she'll be okay. We got all the mean stuff right in our suitcase here. It can't get at her now. As I said, you take out the old and put in the new and you're okay. Neither of you is an MD. Why didn't they send an MD from emergency? Hell, the operator's cigarette moved on his lip. We get these cases 9 or 10 a night. Got so many starting a few years ago we had the special machines built. With the optical lenses, of course, that was new. The rest is ancient. You don't need an MD. Case like this, all you need is 2 handymen. Clean up the problem in half an hour. Look. He started for the door. We gotta go. Just had another call on the old ear thimble, 10 blocks from here. Someone else just jumped off the cap of a pillbox. Call if you need us again. Keep her quiet. We got a contraceptive in her. She'll wake up hungry. So long. And the men with the cigarettes in their straight-line mouths, the men with the eyes of puff adders, took up their load of machine and tube, their case of liquid melancholy and the slow dark sludge of nameless stuff, and strolled out the door. Montag sank down into a chair and looked at this woman. Her eyes were closed now, gently, and he put out his hand to feel the warmness of breath on his palm. Mildred, he said at last. There are too many of us, he thought. There are billions of us, and that's too many. Nobody says anyone. Nobody knows anyone. Strangers come and violate you. Strangers come and cut your heart out. Strangers come and take your blood. Good God, who were those men? I never saw them before in my life. Half an hour passed. The bloodstream in this woman was new, and it seemed to have done a new thing to her. Her cheeks were very pink, and her lips were very fresh and full of color, and they looked soft and relaxed. Someone else's blood there. If only someone else's flesh and brain and memory. If only they could have taken her mind along to the dry cleaners and emptied the pockets and steamed and cleansed it and reblocked it and brought it back in the morning. If only. He got up and put back the drapes and opened the windows wide to let the night air in. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. Wasn't only an hour ago, Clarice McClellan in the street and him coming in the dark room and his foot kicking the little crystal bottle? Only an hour, but the world had melted down and sprung up in a new and colorless form. Laughter blew across the moon-colored lawn from the house of Clarice and her father and mother and the uncle who smiled so quietly and so earnestly. Above all, their laughter was relaxed and hearty and not forced in any way, coming from the house that was so brightly lit this late at night, while all the other houses were kept to themselves in darkness. Montag heard the voices talking, giving, talking, weaving, reweaving their hypnotic web. Montag moved throughout the French windows and crossed the lawn, without even thinking of it. He stood outside the talking house in the shadows, thinking he might even tap on their door and whisper, "Let me come in. I won't say anything. I just want to listen. What is it you're saying?" But instead he stood there, very cold, his face a mask of ice, listening to a man's voice, the uncle, moving along at an easy pace. "Well, after all, this is the age of the disposable tissue. Blow your nose on a person, wad them, flush them away, reach for another, blow, wad, flush, everyone using everyone else's coattails. How are you supposed to even root for the home team when you don't even have a program or know the names? For what matter, what color jerseys are they wearing as they trot out onto the field?" Montag moved back to his own house, left the window wide, checked Mildred, tucked the covers under her carefully, and then lay down with the moonlight on his cheekbones and on the frowning ridges of his brow, with the moonlight distilled in each eye to form a silver cataract there. 1 drop of rain, Clarice. Another drop, Mildred. A third, the uncle. A fourth, the fire tonight. 1 Clarice, 2 Mildred, 3 uncle, 4 fire. 1 Mildred, 2 Clarice, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Clarice, Mildred, uncle, fire, sleeping tablets, men, disposable tissue, coattails, blow, wad, flush. Clarice, Mildred, uncle, fire, tablets, tissues, blow, wad, flush. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 rain, the storm, the uncle laughing, thunder falling downstairs, the whole world pouring down, the fires gushing up in a volcano, all rushing on down, around in a spouting roar, and a rivering stream toward morning. "I don't know anything anymore," he said, and let a sleep lozenge devolve on his tongue. "I think that this is a good place to stop for the day." We didn't make it all the way through part 1, but we got about 20 pages in, and I think that's a good start. Do you want me to continue reading Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451? If so, let me know, and we shall continue this adventure together. On to another day, Ray Bradbury. I hope you all have a wonderful day, evening, or night, wherever you are. Good night.